Alright, I know what you're thinking.
This guy has hair?
Yeah, I know. Literally every video I've ever made, I've been wearing a hat. This time I decided to not wear a hat because my wife says my new haircut looks handsome. Last week, I unpacked the cosmological argument, and my thesis of that video was atheists can't explain the origins of the universe really at all. In fact, they don't really have a good response to it. Now, as I predicted, atheists did, of course, show up in my comment section and kind of lost their minds on me. And so what we're going to do is we're going to talk through some of the points that atheists bring when you claim that they don't have a good response to the cosmological argument. And what you'll see as we begin to unpack these responses is, honestly, they just don't really work very well. And so by the end of this video, my hope is that you, as a Christian or maybe somebody who's just kind of skeptical, comes away from the video with more confidence that God exists and that he created everything. Now, in the last video, we discovered that the universe had a cause, and this was evident for multiple reasons, a couple of which being Einstein's theory of general relativity, which essentially says that the universe had a beginning, as well as the law of causality. And I know I'm using kind of big words here. If you're interested in checking out that video, I would highly encourage you, before you finish this video, maybe even go back and watch that one, and then come back and finish this video so you can be up to date on the conversation we're having. Now, because we know that the universe had a beginning, we have to recognize that something outside of the observable characteristics within the universe, time, space, and matter, had to set those components into motion. And this, of course, is where we get the idea that God created everything. He set time, space, and matter all into motion. Because of the law of causality, Einstein's theory of general relativity, and Edwin Hubble observing that the universe was expanding, this is sort of where we get the idea of the Big Bang. And so as I was reading through the comments and responding to some, I noticed a theme starting to... My dog is barking. Maybe that wasn't even picked up in the mic. Now, as I was reading through the comments of my last video and responding to some as well, I noticed a couple themes kind of reoccurring throughout a lot of atheists' objections to me. And there are three main objections to the point that I made in my last video that I observed in the comment section that we're going to unpack today. The first one is this: the Big Bang happened, but it isn't the origin of the universe. The second one is that the universe is infinite. And the third one is the law of causality isn't real, or something like that. I was a little bit confused, but atheists sort of don't seem to like the law of causality for this because, I don't know. I honestly think it just is because it proves them wrong, and they don't want to admit that. But they basically say that it isn't real, I guess. So like I said, in this video, I'm going to respond to these three objections, and hopefully by the end you can see why the theistic worldview, at least when it comes to the cosmological argument, is much more feasible than the atheistic worldview. So let's respond to the first objection that these atheists make, which of course is that the Big Bang happened, but it isn't the origin of the universe. Now, if the Big Bang happened, but it wasn't what caused time, space, and matter to be set into motion, or to just exist, we've got a dilemma on our hands. If you believe in the Big Bang, then you have to believe that everything, time, space, and matter, began to exist. In other words, if you believe that the Big Bang did happen, but don't believe it was the origin of the universe, that's not the Big Bang. Now, the second big point that a lot of these atheists were coming to the table with was that the universe is infinite, that there was no starting point, that it's always existed. And to these atheists, I simply ask three questions. First off, why do you think the universe is expanding then? Second off, do you think Einstein just simply got this wrong? If we go back to Einstein, first off, he was one of the most intelligent human beings that existed on planet Earth. Second off, he didn't want to discover this. He was not a theist. I think he ended up becoming a pantheist because he couldn't deny that the universe had a beginning and that the beginning points to a God. And my third question is, do you believe in the law of causality? Which I think we all do, even if we don't admit it. And of course, we're going to get to the law of causality in a minute here. But even if none of those questions really applied here, here's how I would respond further. There's lots of logical reasons why the universe can't be infinite, but I think one of the most compelling and interesting is the fact that we are here in time right now. An infinite number of days and time in general implies that there's a lack of forward movement in time. If you think of kind of where we're at right now in relation to time, it's like somebody started the clock, and as time has moved forward, we've gotten to where we are now. If time was infinite, then there would be no point that the clock had started, and therefore we wouldn't be here. Let me further elaborate on this. Every single morning that you and I wake up, there is a day added to the proverbial timeline. If there are days and hours and minutes constantly being added to our timeline, that implies that the universe could not be infinite. In other words, it would be taking infinity and trying to add 25 or something to infinity. That defeats the whole purpose of infinity. And yet we continue to move forward and be able to look back at where we were yesterday, and so on and so forth. To dumb it down a little bit, we wouldn't be able to be here and progress forward if the universe and time existing in the universe had always existed forever. It doesn't work. That doesn't make sense. Now, before we move on to the rest of the video, I want to encourage you to comment down below. If you're a Christian and maybe you're gaining something out of this, be sure to like the video and comment your thoughts. If you're learning something new, or maybe you just agree with me, let me know down in the comments. Like I said in the last video, I want to know that I'm doing something right, so I'd love to hear that from you as a fellow Christian. And if you're an atheist, on the other hand, and you have objections to bring, let's talk about them. I'd love to hear what you have to say as well. And once again, if you want to know the information that I'm telling you and see where it comes from, and also get a much more in-depth study on these concepts, check out this book right here. It's called I Don't Know How to Be a It's called I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist by Dr. Frank Turek and Dr. Norman Geisler. And essentially what the book does is it sets out to prove that it takes more faith to be an atheist than it does to be a Christian. And so I'll leave a link down in the comments for this. The link takes you directly to, of course, this book, and it costs just a little over $17. In the last video, I said it was $17 even. That wasn't technically true. I'm sorry. It's like $17.34 or something like that. And obviously, you probably have to pay tax. And if you don't have Prime, you'll have to pay shipping. So yeah, but anyway, it's under $20 for a 400-page book of golden information if you're anybody like me who loves Christian apologetics. So I'd highly encourage you to go check it out. I'll also leave some links down below for helpful videos that will help you develop your view on the cosmological argument and why I think it's a great argument for God. And if you're interested in my content and you've been enjoying the conversation happening over the last several weeks, please do me a favor and subscribe and click the notification bell just so you don't miss anything as I continue to release new videos. So the final objection that I was seeing throughout my comment section of the last video is that essentially the law of causality is false, or it doesn't apply in this situation, or something like that. And as far as I can tell, the only resource that atheists can really cite for the belief that the law of causality is false is Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. This principle essentially says that it's impossible to know both the momentum and the positioning of a subatomic particle with certainty. For the slow people like me, this essentially means that it's impossible to know how fast subatomic particles are moving and where they will go. And what atheists will take away from this principle is that because we can't know how fast and the destination of subatomic particles, well, then why do we need to know the origins of the universe? But the problem with this is that the uncertainty principle has nothing to do with causation. It has everything to do with predictability. So, of course, we can't predict everything within the universe. There's many things that we just can't predict. But this principle doesn't really respond to the law of causality. It just says that we can't predict things. So this argument is honestly pretty ineffective. It doesn't really work because, once again, the principle doesn't really apply here. I think what atheists are trying to say here is that it's okay to say, I don't know, to certain things. And I saw a lot of that in my comment section of the last video. A lot of people saying, why aren't you just content with I don't know? Or why can't you just take I don't know as an answer? I actually had one atheist try to tell me that I should just take I don't know as my final authority and reject my Christian faith, which I think is just a wild thing to say. And this is where just a lot of atheists lose me. If we have a theory over here that has an abundance of evidence for God, and we have something over here which has no evidence for God and no evidence for no God, well, for me, it's a very obvious decision between the two. There's more evidence over here, so I'm going to go with the side that has more evidence. In the same way that we've been discussing in my series on Islam. It's absolutely insane to go with Islam's version of Jesus when they have this much evidence, and it contradicts the mountain of evidence that Christians have for Jesus, which is historically reliable. I'm going to go on a rant. Now, I want to be totally honest with you guys, especially my Christian audience here. Something I was a little bit convicted by in the last video is that I made some arguments against atheism, and I got so consumed in that process. I like this sort of thing. I like debates, and I like to discuss my faith and debate my faith and stuff. But I didn't have any scripture. So in this video, I want to pull us back to scripture. We can have all these debates. We can talk about science and philosophy, and it's very easy to get caught up in a lot of those things. But as Christians, if we're not ultimately pointing it back to God, then this is all meaningless, to be honest with you. So when it comes to the current situation that we're in with this never-ending debate with atheists, here's what Paul has to say in the book of Romans. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men, who by their unrighteousness suppress the truth. For what can be known about God is plain to them, because God has shown it to them. For his invisible attributes, namely, his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world, in the things that have been made, so they are without excuse. Now, there's a lot of really deep concepts in just these few verses, and there's some concepts in here that are difficult to wrestle with, even for Christians. And I think as Christians, what we need to be aware of is to read the Bible for what it says, but also present the truth to those who we're debating with honesty, but also gentleness. And so I've seen a lot of Christian evangelists and stuff, essentially, when they get to a certain point in this debate, they'll just tell their opponent, "You're suppressing the truth." And it's I don't necessarily think it works that way. I think for a lot of atheists, I think it's a little bit more subconscious. I think they see everything around them. They see the beauty of the world. They see how incredible everything around them is, and they just say, "I don't know," which of course is what we've been seeing in this conversation so far. They say, "I don't know," and they're content with that. And I think that's kind of how a lot of atheists, at least in 2025, suppress the truth. And I know the atheists in the comments are going to be even more mad at me than the last video when I say that. But that seems to be the case when you just say you're content with "I don't know," and when you tell me to be content with "I don't know." That looks like suppressing the truth to me. The other interesting thing to know from this text is that God has plainly revealed himself. Once again, it's very obvious to see that this world was clearly created. There's order. There's very clear evidence of design. When it comes to the cosmological argument, there is very clear evidence that we are not here by accident. And one of the most powerful parts of this section is that all humanity is without excuse, because it's very clear that around us the world is intricate. There's order. There's a very clear design at play here. And so you, the curious skeptic or atheist, maybe to this point, and maybe thinking, yeah, maybe God does exist. Maybe he does. I'm not saying you're actually admitting that. I'm just saying maybe there's somewhere in deep down that you're saying maybe God does exist. But you're asking, what do I do next? Well, if there is a creator of the universe, that means that you probably should know him and maybe should worship him. I don't expect you to understand those two things right now, but let me just get into essentially what the Christian message is, which is, of course, the gospel. God made everything perfect. And he put you and I into the perfect world, but we screwed it up. We sinned. But because God is not just a powerful creator, but also a faithful father, he set an action plan into motion that would save us from our sin. The pinnacle of this plan is found in the Gospels, in the books of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. The Gospels record the story of Jesus of Nazareth, which I'm assuming you've heard of at this point. Jesus of Nazareth was a man who claimed to be God, and he proved to be God by doing miracles and fulfilling prophecy. He was also a perfect human being. He never sinned, unlike you and I who sin every day. And because God is just, and because you and I sin every day, there is a punishment that is required for our sin. So that's why Jesus, God in human flesh, came on your behalf and took the penalty, the punishment that you deserved for your sin. The only perfect human being that ever existed stepped into your place for your sin so that you didn't have to take the punishment for your sin. I'm guessing you know the rest of the story. He didn't stop there. He rose from the dead, defeating death and proving his divine identity. Like I said before, he did miracles, he fulfilled prophecy, but then he did something that was undeniably divine. He rose from the dead. Friend, I want you to know, whoever you are listening, this is why I am a Christian. I'm not a Christian because of the cosmological argument. I'm not a Christian because my parents told me to be one. I'm a Christian because Jesus stepped into my place for my sin. And there's actually really good evidence for that. Now, if you have any questions about that, feel free to reach out to me on Instagram. I'm happy to answer any kind of Christian or apologetics questions. Or if you'd like to email me using the email that should be somewhere on my YouTube channel. You're welcome to reach out to me there as well if you want to talk about faith. And if you want to see the conversation that I mentioned throughout this video, definitely check out the link somewhere on this screen. Or if you want to see why I believe that Christians have the accurate Jesus and Islam certainly does not, check out the other video on the screen. I'll see you over in one of those videos in just a minute. We'll see you next time.